Welcome back, Bolo viewers. As you can see, that's got to be the most said phrase in the vlogosphere, as you can see. If I made a documentary about YouTube content creators, I would call it As You Can See. But I digress. As you can see, I'm on the Portaband bandsaw here, cutting in the shape of the heel as prep for further adventures in bolster welding. Just doing the old multi-cuts and then using the saw to clean out the little kerfs left technique. Guess it didn't like the taste of that last chunk there. And now we are just using a series of files, half round files, round files, to clean out the saw cuts and smooth everything over. We're going to be doing a bunch of that at hyper speed here too. Every time I watch myself move that fast, I get, oh man, boy, I'm jealous. I'm jealous of speeded up me that can file stuff that fast. Anyway, it's doing a nice job of cleaning that up. Get a nice smooth arc, and we need there to be a small interior radius there at the junction of the guard lug and where the heel comes up under the ricasso there. We don't want there to be a sharp corner there because that would be a stress riser and heat treat big time. Possibly even a stress riser during forge welding, so you can see me getting in there with that little needle file and making extra sure that there's no sharp saw cut in there to propagate a crack. Here we're prepping up some of the remainder of the twisted W's bar that we made for the edge. This is one of the bolsters being cut off rough here. As soon as I go deburr this, I will then show you how I marked out, and we'll cut the other one. Okay, and now I want the pattern on both sides of the blade to be in the denser part of the bar here. This little end didn't get twisted very much, so we're staying away from that. Let this dry a little bit. Pretty warm this week in the shop. It's in the 80s again. We got up to 100 for a while, like a week ago, and then we dipped back down, but we're climbing back up in heat again this week. All right, so I'm going to put that exactly on top of there. Hold that down tight.
and use it as a guide to scribe our second block. That way I don't have to worry about the saw curve or anything, or measuring actual measurements, anything other than the actual blade part that it's going to sit on. Now I'm going to bandsaw cut this. Alright, so the elements necessary for our assembled integral are now fabricated and present. We got the blade ground clean here on both sides. We got our heel prepped here and de-stress risered. And then we've got a block cut for each side of the guard. The guard is going to be thin in front, the lug, but in the back it's going to have a bit of added bolster to it with just a simple file work, as seen in the drawing. So it's going to kind of come up about like that. And later we're going to anneal this after forge welding and doing our drawing work on the tang and stuff. And probably just bandsaw and stock removal this shape out. And then I'm just going to draw the whole thing out this way enough to get that guard lug. Leave it massive. Things forge weld better when they have some mass to them. And the nice thing about these actually being so thick is that you can see, yes, we're going to lose a little thickness when we forge weld it, but it's still going to be pretty massive. The cool thing is that when we actually grind it down into a guard shape from being a rough forging, there's enough mass here that we're going to have to grind pretty far into this guard stock from each side. And that's going to improve the pattern. Since this is twisted W's, about the middle third of this bar is always going to have the best pattern. So just like leaving the edge thick, so we're going to grind that in later and get to a good explodey pattern in the core of the bar, we're also leaving the guard stock thick so that when we grind and stock removal a guard shape out of it, we're going to get some hopefully really good pattern from having ground far enough into this bar. So these are all, you know, just things that it's good to be thinking about along the way. Pattern orientation, pattern depth, pattern pairing, distortion, lack of distortion. Anyway, everything is flat and clean. We're going to go clamp this up and we are going to TIG weld this all the way around. I actually did the TIG welding of these bolsters as an Instagram live stream. So if you want to check that out, you can actually go to my Instagram profile, which is also Salem Straub. And you can see me welding this and talking about the process in real time. But let's just have a quick look at the results. Just a quick, very shallow fusion TIG job all the way around. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be super strong, it just has to seal the oxygen out and hold these on long enough for them to get forge welded. And these welds are so shallow that they'll pretty much just scale off. And by the time I'm grinding the scale off, you won't even see the welds anymore. They're not that deep. Now I am going to go fire up the forge, and then I will forge weld this on camera.
And we're forging. So this has been soaking at welding heat, 2165, for about 4 or 5 minutes. And I am striking it with my 4-pound rounding hammer, with the flat side actually, making sure to flip it every few hits. I don't want the anvil sucking too much heat out of one bolster or the other. Just flipping it back and forth and not hitting super hard, just trying to really concentrate on getting all of the surface area. Straighten the blade just a little bit every time, because there are some inertial effects that will cause it to bend while you're hitting the bolster. Another good heat and a short soak. We're doing the same thing. Trying to pull it out and start with the other bolster this time, the other side. Same strategy, flip it a lot. Don't let the anvil cool either side too much while you're working the other side. Straighten a little bit. And we're generally putting it back in the forge at a welding heat. Third heat, same deal. We're just trying to strike it all over both sides of the weld joints just to make sure everything is coming into intimate contact, pressed together as close as possible, and then we're also let some of the welding happen by giving it soaks in the forge to encourage grain growth across those boundaries. I figure 3 good heats of this, mild hammering and soaking, will get you a perfect weld. In my experience, you don't have to forge it down more than that. There was an old rule of thumb that you would hear that billets had to be forged down 40 to 50% of their initial height to make sure that you had consolidated a good solid forge weld enough, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of that was just the amount of heat and time involved. That was getting them grain growth across the welds too. They didn't really understand it as aging the welds in those days. They thought that the impact was what did almost all of the work. Guys like Daryl Meyer showed that you needed not all that much heat and maybe not even that much impact as long as your weld surfaces were well prepped and you used a good soak. As a matter of fact, I think in the old days, some of what they were having to do to get a good weld was to squeeze all that borax flux contaminant out from between the layers. And if they didn't hit it a lot, that wouldn't happen. So you can see I'm actually drawing the width of that guard down. I am checking the point of this, the point shape against the pattern. It had been a little bit off when I cooled it down last time before the bolster welds, and I was just strategizing straightening it now since we're just heating it back up anyway. So I straightened the back of the tip profile a little bit, and I've been drawing out the bottom guard lug throughout these last couple heats. I think I wanted to just have one more little straighten and alignment tap all the way around this thing one time here before going to the next step. You can see me heading over to the chop saw with the billet there, and I've cut the handle off. Now I'm holding the snout in tongs. We're going to use some top tooling and the power hammer to start isolating and knocking down the tang stub, preparatory to actually drawing it out as a blind tang. Hitting it up a little bit from both ways, just using that very simple step block from above. Got to have your dies aligned for this kind of thing pretty well. And we want to keep it hot and work short heats with this kind of stuff, because we're actually putting a fair amount of stress on the back of the bolster welds by pinching this material down right next to them. So you don't want to open up welds adjacent to your work. Keep the work hot so that force isn't transferred very far throughout the steel down the line to some stuff that you're actually not trying to affect. At this point, I've got the tang stub drawn out to the length I want, and the bottom guard lug drawn out to the width that I want it to be. This looks like a big chunk right now. That's okay, we have a bandsaw. And now I'm just giving it a little tip tap. Check it back and forth. Sight down at lots from different ways. It always pays to be patient here at the end of forging, because it's a lot easier to fix it now than to have to deal with something that you just shined on at the end of the last heat. I think that looks good. And now we're going to put the tang end in. We're going to start normalizing it. normalize the tang, and then I flipped it around and normalized the blade here. And swing it around and let it air cool a little bit faster, stuff like that. I did 3 normalizes all told on this piece, and then because I had some bandsaw cutting to do next, I went ahead and subcritical annealed it at the end of all of it, just to get it nice and soft for cutting, filing, whatever I might need to do to it. And the tang end too, because that's going to need to get tapped, actually, or threaded with a die later. And with the tang heated up just enough to soften it, one more time, we're going to go set the billet down, or set the blade blank down at this point, and we are going to shut the forge down.
Top of the morning to you. Let's have a look. So, I did some work off camera. My phone died. Needed to charge for a while. I was in the groove, needed to get work done. Believe it or not, I need to get paid on a fairly regular basis, and I need to keep this project going. I didn't do too much, though, off camera, so I'll just be able to kind of catch you up and explain here. So you saw me forge weld this thing. And after I got it forge welded, I adjusted the profile just a little bit to kind of match mostly the snout of this guy a little bit better. And then I gave it a subcritical anneal or two, just so it would be soft for me to cut into with the bandsaw. Cooled it all down, and then I did some cutting on it and some grinding on it. Now what I did was I cut this area out. Here's what was there. Let's see. How did that fit in there? Well, yeah, this used to be longer. So that used to fit right there. And then I cut it out, and then I ground that in a little bit more, ground this forward a little bit. Right now it's quite a blocky shape still, so I will be grinding this thinner to look more like that. Probably grinding this back a little bit into shape better. But I'd like to leave it blocky for now until I get the blade actually roughed out better, and then I will grind the guard in to the blade. First it's kind of grind the guard in, find the clean steel, and then center the blade on that. And then it's grind the blade to the guard, and then once you get the blade pretty much roughed out, then it's refine the guard to the blade. Let's have a look on the pattern. So the tip is pretty darn close in shape, and coming back it's pretty darn close too in curvature, everything like that. Now I did make the blade an inch longer than planned just because I had the material, and I have leeway on this project, so I'll just go with a 13-inch blade instead of 12-inch, and that's makes it even more badass, arguably. And then so you can see we got ample height on our guard to what we had planned, so that's good. We got the ricasso width to the pattern, we got the tang alignment to the pattern, and so that's good. And we got enough length here to actually grind our neck it down on the grinder for the threaded portion of the end of the tang. So we're all within spec. The guard is still pretty massive, but you can see that we are down to nice clean steel all the way around. The welds look really good and solid. Nice clean steel. Right here where you would want it to be, it's crispity clean. So I feel real good about that. And then in the front, we've just hit it up roughly with the corner of the platen belt on the grinder, and that's looking good too. Just a little bit of scum left there, a little bit of scale left there to grind off. Probably about 5 thou will do it. And then I'm going to go to the grinder and rough all of this off with 36 grit ceramics. Grind in some distal taper. define the edge, grind that in, all of that, and I'm going to full flat grind it first. And then I'm thinking about adding a compound grind to it. With kukri, they would call it an ancola, which means hollowed out behind the edge to give it better weight and chopping ability. Well, to reduce weight. And then basically the forward still remains a little heavier because of this center of percussion out here, the width of it. And so it's still a chopper, but it's not just as heavy and clunky. And it'll actually bite deeper because there's less resistance, less friction against the material being cut up here behind the edge. So I may do that. We will see. I can't wait though to get this ground clean, have a check etch at it, and look at the pattern. That's always one of the fun spots. So stay with me.